Last Saturday night, I watched opening night of a show called Little Red, an exquisite production by Actors Gymnasium in Evanston in partnership with Looking Glass Theater. Little Red tells and adapts the story of Little Red Riding Hood, a familiar story to most of us, through circus acrobatics, dance, and music, and without dialogue. And while I could be telling you this as a shamelessly proud parent with a child in the cast, which I am, I'm not doing it for that reason, but I am. Since Saturday, I've been recalling the story of Little Red Riding Hood, which, to be honest, I haven't given a lot of thought to in the last few years. In elementary school and middle school, I did do some serious puppet shows with my friend Liz. We had a refrigerator box that was our stage, and we had a Little Red in our puppet shows, only she was going to Grandma's house to bring challah. We got a really good gig at the synagogue nursery school. We got paid $1 a performance. Remember, it was about 1974. But really, what really stuck with me, though those were great memories, were the costumes. In the Actors Gymnasium production, the costumes are beautiful. They're designed by a costume designer of Looking Glass Theater. And as you may recall in the traditional story of Little Red Riding Hood, the wolf dresses up like Grandma, remember this, to trick Red, or Little Red Riding Hood. In this particular production at Actors Gym, the costume handoffs are full of drama and dance and graceful movements. The wolf wears kind of like a fur coat. It's sort of elegant. And I was struck by the costumes and the costume changes in a show that had no words. So I did some searching of words. I've learned that pages upon pages have been written about Little Red Riding Hood, its potential meaning, history, symbolism, versions of the story. There are different versions over history with similar but differing names. Symbolism and meaning are attributed to the story, and so are various sources to its history. Nothing, though, spoke to the costumes. No doubt, as it is the season, in Judaism anyway, for costumes on a holiday. Jack's nodding like, of course, she's going to go there. And also the Torah portion for dramatic garments in Torah. I kept returning to costumes. Yes, this is the season of Jewish costumes. Purim begins Thursday evening. And as you may recall, Purim has much to do with clothing and dressing up. First, at the outset, the little-known piece that Vashti, the first queen, refuses to appear before the king in only her crown. She said, "I'm not coming naked before your party, king." She gets kicked out. Esther comes in, doesn't reveal her identity until her people are threatened, and then she dresses up and goes to seek the king's life-saving redemption for the Jewish people. And later, you may recall that Haman had been engaged in a conversation about who the king should honor. Haman thinks it's himself, but in fact it's Mordecai. And Mordecai is dressed up and is led around by Haman because Mordecai is being honored by King Ahasuerus. Interestingly, and as we know, we celebrate this holiday often by dressing up. I learned this week that this is a costume possibly dating back to medieval Italy. Some say we wear costumes on Purim to lift up the joy of the celebration. Some say to lift up the themes of hidden identity. For example, right, Esther doesn't acknowledge she's Jewish until she needs to tell the king this. And some say that we wear costumes to respect the needs of the poor. You may recall that at the end of the Purim story, we're told to both give sweets to our neighbors, mishloach manot, and also to give matanot le'evyonim, to give gifts to the poor. And as you may recall, those of you who studied Maimonides' Ladder some years back, it's an honor to, we try to respect the needs of those to whom we're giving and not acknowledge who's the giver, who's the recipient. So who knows the reasons? Another explanation that is given is that the costumes worn in Purim spiels or plays, which date back to somewhere around the 17th century, were created to offer the critique of oppressive European rulers. Professor Ori Soltis, professor at Georgetown, explained that Purim spiels developed, and the use of not only costumes but allegory served to create a sense of comedic catharsis. Professor Soltis explains that for while the Purim spiel traditionally tells the story of Purim, it also draws heavily on the political tropes of the day and popular culture. When Jews in Europe were not able to overtly criticize Christian hegemony or leadership, spiels allowed them to express their grievances publicly without drawing the attention of their oppressors. So, as Soltis said, and these are his words, excuse one of the words, he says, "We're making fun of those bastards who are treating us so poorly," as he speaks to history, "but we're doing it in a disguised manner, so they don't even realize it." So when many of us dressed as Esther, Haman, or Mordecai, and raise your hand if you were ever Esther or Haman for Purim in your life. Wow, that's it? Wow, okay. Who knew? Mordecai? Okay, my favorite Purim costume of all time was to be a Hamantashen. Anyone else be a Hamantashen? I feel like, a few others? The fields of possibility these days are huge. We see around here lots of Disney characters, we see superheroes, and in an adult realm, we often see spoofs on people in the news as well, in Israel too. In another vein of clothing and current events, when we look to the news, we see lots of commentary on clothing. You might call them costumes. I'm a big reader of the Sunday New York Times style section, which always has a page or two about key elements of style. Recently, there was a piece that says shoes and bags that change how we dress. In the news and in political commentary, there's also a fair amount of talk about clothing. You might have noticed in the news reports from the president's speech the other night, there was commentary about what colors people were wearing, for example. We see messages of power and protest in colors chosen and outfits worn. We've seen some also pretty stern directives about what people should be wearing to connote respect. As we watch people's choices of clothing, we can't help but wonder about the meaning and messaging of the wearer. One of my favorite books is a volume by former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. It's called Read My Pins. Anyone know it? The book is a historical reflection of Albright's work with statecraft work and the jewelry she wore in these situations. Now, she took her work very seriously. It wasn't just about her jewelry. She even says in the introduction, her jewelry was a bit of it. But she chose her jewelry to message her feelings or intentions. So, for example, when she was named Secretary of State, she wore a pin with an eagle. She wore a dove brooch when she was speaking about plans for peace in the Middle East, when Yitzhak Rabin was Prime Minister of Israel. And when meeting with Saddam Hussein, she wore a golden snake. And when she was speaking with Nelson Mandela, she wore a large zebra pin that sat on the shoulder of her suit. The pictures in this book are great. I return to Albright's book from time to time, struck by the intention she messaged aesthetically while she did the heavy work of seeking peace and safety in the world. It always struck me that her jewelry choices honored her work as it messaged her role wordlessly. And as she writes in her book, these choices may have been trivial compared to her work in the world, but in her words, I do believe the right symbol at the correct time can add warmth or needed edge to a relationship. This week in Torah, we read of sacred garments as well. We read of the clothes worn by the priests, Aaron and his sons. The priests were the ritual leaders of the community. This was before rabbis and cantors. They were the big guys, and they were just guys. Multiple garments are described in the portion. The robe, the ephod, the breastplate, the headpiece, and the dramatic, colorful garments or vestments were in royal colors. Some of the colors we see actually in our ark: red, blue, purple, gold, silver. They spoke to power, they spoke to awe, they even spoke to royalty, I think. And they spoke to the priests' importance in the community, the importance of their work. Remember, this was when our ancestors had left Egypt. There was not cohesion in a community, and by bringing them together for ritual, with the priest leadership, they were trying to bring together community and worship. Torah notes that the priestly garments were to be worn for dignity and honor. That is, to elevate the priest's role and what it messaged about their work. The Talmud gives some further interpretation. Talmud understands the priestly garments having an additional purpose, that they were designed to protect human beings against the sins to which they were prone. For example, to prevent miscarriages of justice, to discourage gossip, to protect them against the danger of idolatry, and to protect them against signs such as prideful or arrogant thoughts. So the rabbis of the Talmud said these clothes that the priests wore were to guard them, to remind them of what they were doing and to not transgress. By wearing these items, the priests wore in their work the reminders to work and act with integrity in line with the leadership and the values bestowed upon them. They were reminded not to run amok with their power or their job. Think about it. First of all, it was very heavy clothing. I'm not sure I'd want to wear it every day, but think about clothing, not armor, worn to protect us against our weaknesses. Clothing worn to protect us, to keep us from sinning, from transgressing. Clothing that is beautiful and speaks to power and authority, but not just for its own sake. The priest's garments weren't meant to be showy just because, or to say that they were superior. In fact, to the contrary, it was to remind them you can't break the rules. You have to exercise humility and self-control even as you lift up this sacred work. And there's one more thing. The priest wore a thing called an ephod, kind of like shoulder boards in a military uniform that has something coming in front. And on the ephod were stones. And on the stones, again, heavy, were the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. So the priests literally wore the messaging of their community on their body, on their shoulders. They wore a remembrance of the people they were leading, physically and spiritually heavy, a load. Why? One modern commentary says it was to humble them, to remind them that they are representing the entire community. Imagining leading your family, your business, your community, and wearing the names of everyone you lead on you on heavy stones. What's the impact? Humbling, if not painful. So what's the message for us? We often dress for occasions. We may dress to hide features of our bodies, to hide aspects of what we're doing, or we might even put masks on this time of year. The Torah portion in this Shabbat challenge us to look beyond clothing, as awesome and beautiful as it may be, and to look beyond the clothing that others wear, to consider the actions and words that we do. It may be said that clothes make the man, but really clothing doesn't make the man, woman, or any other person. It's but a start. Clothing may seem to connote authority or represent power, but the values and priorities we message to the world come not through our garments, but through our actions and our words as we wear those garments. So as we wear our clothing and as we act and speak in the world, may we, like the priests, seek to connote, to share the meaning and values of dignity, honor, respect, and humility.